Are you ready for me to start, Ruben?
Yeah, go ahead, Michelle.
All right. Welcome everybody and happy Friday. I hope you're all having a great beginning of the day. So we're going to go over the commercial lease agreement. It is the car format. And next week, as Ruben indicated, we'll be having a letter of intent training. So generally before you hit the commercial lease agreement, the letter of intent comes before that, okay? So on the commercial lease agreement, generally, the lease listing agent will be preparing this form. However, if you're representing a tenant, it's good for you to understand the form as well. So even on the agency disclosure, if it's less than a year, even though it says exceeding 1 year, please go ahead and provide an agency disclosure. Even if this was less than a year, please provide it. Our company likes to have the agency disclosure, and we want that included in your package. Okay, so we all know this form. And attached to the agency disclosure is the California Consumer Privacy Act advisory that comes with the agency disclosure. If the client wants to read more about it, they've provided a couple of websites here right on the form. So we're going to get into the commercial lease agreement. Let me minimize this. Okay, so the commercial lease agreement, CAR, some of the other brokers use AIR, but today we're going to go over CAR. On smaller leases, maybe smaller buildings or landlords with less units, you will see them use the CAR more readily. And it should be something that we're all familiar with. So let's start going. So for reference purposes only, if we were doing this lease today, filling it out for review, we're drafting it, we would put today's date, the landlord here, tenant. So this is the lessor and lessee, okay? And the property is described as, you're gonna put the address here. And this percentage is how much that unit comprises of the percent of the total square footage of the rentable space in the entire building. So you may have to ask the landlord that percentage so they could figure that out for you. And if you have an exhibit for a further description of the premises, you could call it Exhibit A, and I would also note that on your exhibit. Now, that may be a floor plan. So sometimes the landlord, or I'm going to say lessor, so we get used to the words, the lessor will have a floor plan, and you may want to attach that as an exhibit, okay? The lease term begins on the date, the commencement date here. Now here, very important, check A or B here. So month to month would be B. I haven't done too many month to month on commercial. Do you have a question?
Yes. Is this for the representing of the seller? I mean, you're filling up your lease, put it in the market.
No, this is, okay,
But
so this is the actual lease agreement. So the listing agent, once you have reviewed an LOI and the lessor has accepted it,
Okay.
yeah.
When you put their terms, lease should commence, what is that word?
The day you start.
Their term, there you go. Is it most of the time when you have a lease, they give you 1, 2, 3 months before you actually move because you're gonna do a tenant improvement.
Right, okay, so that's
That's
a really
gonna be
good
the-
question. Okay, so he's asking, let's say when the commencement date, let's say we were looking at May 1st. But May and June, the landlord May, June, July. Let's say that the landlord said, okay, because you need to rehab or, do some tenant improvement for your business on this unit, we're going to give you 3 free months. I'm still going to commence it on May 1st. And let me just jump down to where I listed that, because this happens all the time. Tenant shall be provided with 1 or 3 months, whatever it's going to be, of free base rent during the months of And then you're gonna put the months during this free rental month or months, during these free rental month or months, the tenant shall be responsible to pay all utilities. And if there was a common area maintenance, you also want to say and common area maintenance fee. So you always want to reference down here, but let's commence the lease and then reference if there's free, we call it rental abatement, as you said, okay? So really good question, because that comes up a lot.
So Michelle, in that case, the lease starts, but they don't start paying until, let's just say 3 months, right?
Right, and then under that handwriting that I was just writing in so people understood, you can put rental commencement date shall be, and then the date they're gonna start paying. But you wanna cover that they're paying the utilities and if applicable, common area maintenance fee, which we refer to in the business as a CAM fee. You wanna make sure you're referring to that. We're gonna go ahead and commence this lease. And then we're gonna roll and make sure that we've noted it down below, okay?
Also, insurance they need to pay too.
Yeah, and that I have an insurance, okay. So the lease shall terminate on the date and at the time you specify here, or it's month to month. I never do a renewal or extension term together with this. Just, I always leave this blank, but again, that would be up to the lessor, the landlord. Okay? Yeah,
This one to be clarified, can you go? Yeah, so the date on that and.
right here.
Yeah, the date on the top, right? Oh,
That's
yeah.
today, if I'm
Okay.
writing it
Yeah,
today.
and the term date is all the same?
No, this is, I'm writing this today for reference purposes only.
Okay, and then that one.
And then this one is when the commencement date of the lease is gonna start. So I'm starting it in May, but we're still gonna give them some rental abatement period, but we're noting it in the lease. Okay?
Okay.
Okay, so the base rent, tenant agrees to pay the base rent and you check only one. This one, normally, number one, you're not gonna check unless it's probably a shorter term, 1 or 2 years, because this amount here would be for the term of the agreement. So number one, we generally don't check. Number two, you would have to fill in for CPI, the Consumer Price Index. Sometimes landlords use it, sometimes they don't. You could also check in accordance with the attached rent schedule. You can make an addendum and put May 1st, through whatever, and the rental amount. And if you're increasing it, let's say 3%, you're going to list out all the years of the agreement, and then you're going to put the new base rent. Okay. So you could check in accordance with the attached rent schedule and do all the dates. You want to be very inclusive of all the dates and the amount for that year that they'll be paying, okay? Or if it's a 3-year lease, you could check 3 per month for the period commencing. You could put the date here of the first year and then the next year and then the next year, but sometimes these are 5-year leases. So if it's that, you could certainly fit it all in there. But the safest way is to, if it's longer, go ahead and attach that addendum outlining like this. Okay, the amount and the commencement date and ending, and then you're going to go right down through all the years. Okay. Base rent is payable on the first day of each calendar month. The payment rent shall be paid to, this is very important. We don't want to leave blanks because we don't want questions later. So make sure you're filling in. I'm going to keep using lessor. So we all understand lessor means landlord. Okay. So the lessor, you want to put the name and the address where they want the rent to post, where they want to have the mail delivered, or excuse me, the rent delivered. Or if they have other instructions, if it was by wire. I was listening to a training. A lot of times if you go by, let's say they're wiring to the landlord and there was an issue, let's say they had already noticed them because they were late or something, by allowing them to wire in, and if Peter's here, he can jump in, that may restart any process you had with, if you were processing an eviction. So normally bigger landlords, and we work for some with multiple units, they don't allow any wire in. They want the check, okay? So that's one reason that I discovered in training when I was listening again. And I'll let Peter address that if he's here, if he has anything further to add on that. Okay, so I'm going to continue on. Early possession, tenant is entitled to possession of the premises on. Yeah, there's no early possession. So you could put the commencement date or NA. Okay, you're not going to give them early possession, but you can put entitled to possession because it's not early, but you can put NA here, or you can put the commencement date, but it's not really early possession, okay?
Then why does it say early?
Because sometimes a commencement date will start in May, but the unit's already vacant, so the landlord's gonna be nice and give them the keys on April 21st. Okay, but you would not give keys until you have a fully executed lease agreement, cashier's check with all the funds in that's due. So sometimes you'll see a 10-day ride on that where they will give them early possession. Okay. And then it's going to say tenant is not obligated to pay base rent, is not obligated to pay rent other than base rent, whether or not the tenant is obligated to pay rent prior to commencement date. So normally if you're giving them free rent, you're not going to have them pay. I mean, if you're giving them early possession, you're not going to prorate 10 days in. It's just a kind of a courtesy. So security deposit, the tenant agrees to pay the lessor, the lessee agrees to pay the lessor the amount of the security deposit. This is generally going to be outlined, which we will go over next week on a letter of intent. So everybody's already going to know what the lessor is expecting as a security deposit because it is subject to applications and credit checks. So if the base rent increases during the term, so if the base rent goes up, because usually this is going to be 2 times the base rent, including common area maintenance fee, if that's applicable, it's going to be 2 times that. So if the base rent goes up during the term and this box is checked, the delta, the difference, the landlord can ask the tenant to put that into a security deposit. So if the rent went up, if this box is checked, then the landlord can ask for the difference to be, put into the security deposit, because the original security deposit was based on probably 2 times, the beginning rental rate. So that's up to the lessor if they want you to check that box. Go ahead, Clint.
One question is this a limitation on the security? I mean, it's based on the negotiation. It doesn't have to be like a 1 month, 2 months.
It really depends on the lessor and their review of the package.
There's no limit. I mean, there's no example like residential, you cannot charge people 2 months.
Yeah, this is commercial,
What
so
you don't
that's a
know.
good, I don't know where there's a cap. I'm not sure if Peter's here, he can answer that. But this is solely based on review of credit, review of their application, review of how long they've been in business. There's a lot more that goes in to reviewing a business that's going into your space. They're going to be looking at a lot of things, including how long if it's an entity, how long the entity's been active, and most landlords, I would say 99.9, if it is an entity, let me bring that up now, you're going to need to have a guarantor on it. And we'll show you that below. If Peter or
Hey,
Ruben
Michelle,
want to jump in,
quick question. It's me, Paul,
okay.
or I guess an observation. I was thinking just from like a practical standpoint that the purpose for an agreement is so that you have a fixed amount, right? So pertaining to the agreement. So now that there's a potential that they can increase the rent, right? Is
Right, but it's not, okay, so they can increase the rent, Paul, but this is all agreed upon ahead of time because you'll see in the class next week, commercial agreements generally kick off with a letter of intent. It is a non-binding document. See, we're kind of putting the horse before the carriage. But I wanted to get to this first because we were going to do the letter of intent, but we had to move it to next week. But you're going to have the rental rate increases and already embedded in that letter of intent.
Got it. So you could
So-
forecast and you could you do have an idea of what.
Yes. Yeah, it's not a surprise. Now here, I haven't seen landlords, to be honest, really increase the base rent by the same proportion. I guess that would apply if you were renting a very large space, but on the smaller, I haven't seen them check this and go back and ask for the difference, you know?
Got it.
That
Okay.
is up to
All
the
right.
lessor. Yeah. So there's
Michelle-
not going to be a surprise. You're going to have a letter of intent laid out ahead of time.
Can I add something, Michelle?
Yes.
So when you get to this part of the transaction where you're actually filling out a lease agreement, you've already gone through all the negotiations and both parties are already gonna know and have an idea of what they
Yes.
agreed upon. So the negotiations have already been dealt with. So this is just putting it on paper so both parties can execute and then it can
Correct.
become legal. So by you filling this out, both parties have already agreed, somewhat already agreed to all the terms.
Got it.
Yeah,
Perfect.
and on the letter of intent, you'll see next week, it's the pertinent, the top terms, like how much the base rent will increase annually. Is there a clam fee? It's the very top level terms. So, all of the financial terms, will be included in that non-binding letter of intent. So you negotiate that, you bat it out, you counter the letter of intent. It can go back and forth, 2-3 times.
Got
But
it.
it is
Okay.
not going to be a surprise.
Got it. Got it. Okay.
Okay.
Thank you.
So, as they're reminding you here, the tenant cannot use or the lessee cannot use the security deposit in lieu of the last month's rent. However, the lessor may use the security deposit to cure the lessee's default in payment of the rent. Late fees are non-sufficient fund fees. So this paragraph, you should read it and understand it, but it's pretty standard. Okay, so, and then no interest will be paid on the security deposit. It's right in the agreement. So here's where the payments are brought in. You would have the date that this was prepared, also the premise address. And normally the lessor landlord is going to collect the first month's rent here. So we're going to collect May 1 through May 31. Security deposit will be equal, depending on their credit and depending on the landlord, to 2 times this amount, including CAM fees if it's applicable. Now, maybe they have an opener, there's some with subterranean garages, maybe there's an opener. So they may have a little fee for that in case you lose it, like a deposit on it or a key deposit. But I haven't seen that too much, but sometimes that does happen because the openers aren't cheap. So parking is important to note. So parking, tenant is entitled to blank unreserved or reserved. And the right to parking is or is not included in the base rent, or if there's an additional charge for parking, you would put that here. So generally the ones that I've worked on were leasing units that have a first come, first served parking lot situation. So I'm going to write here, first come, first serve parking. And then I'm going to put NA on the reserved. I'm going to put, well, here, I don't even think they let you draw a line. So the right to parking usually on the leases that I've done is included in the base rent. Some of your high-rise areas, probably in downtown LA, Gus is shaking his head, they probably have a parking fee. So make sure you're asking that lessor. Additional storage. Storage is permitted as follows. Probably this is going to be NA. The right to additional storage space is or is not included. If it is a storage space that you're going to charge for, then you're gonna put the monthly fee here. Normally in commercial spaces, I haven't seen too much additional storage, so I put NA here, because it's not applicable. They probably don't have room, okay? Late charge interest NSF fees. Here it's saying, if any installment of rent due from tenant is received by the landlord 5 calendar days after the due date, or if check is returned in SF, payer shall pay to the landlord. You can put up to, standard, you can go up to 10% here. You could do 6%, 5%, whatever the lessor directs you, put it here. And usually they're not paying 10% interest per annum, but that is up to the landlord to bill that. It isn't going to be up to you. So make sure when you're drafting this for the lessor that you're putting in the amount they want. And at any rate, you're going to be drafting this and you're going to have this sent over on your email. Dear lessor, please review this draft lease and let me know if you have any additions, corrections, or questions. So you want to get that over to them to review before it goes out to the lessee. Okay. Condition of the premises. If the condition was they needed to note something here, maybe an outlet didn't work, they could write that here. And then the items shall be dealt with in the following manner. Let's say an outlet didn't work. You might have already discovered that prior to getting to contract, but maybe they discovered it late. Maybe the lessor will take care of that, which in most cases for something like that, they would. But normally this is all going to be blank. If you don't have any exceptions, then put it in NA. I don't think it hurts even on commercial units. There's no verification of property like there is in residential, but I don't think it hurts you at all to go over there prior to the commencement date with your client and take one last look around to make sure it's being delivered in the condition that you agreed upon in your LOI and that you were expecting. Okay, so zoning and land use. The tenant makes its own investigation, very important regarding the applicable laws. Tenant operating expenses, tenant agrees to pay for all utilities and services directly billed to the tenant. Sometimes there'll be a sub-meter, even in commercial units. There'll be a sub-meter for water, or I've seen where 2 units are sharing one bathroom, so they have some kind of an agreement, on how they will split that water fee. So, and if the tenant desires internet or Wi-Fi, I don't know why, I've just been in the habit of writing this in. This expense shall be the tenant's sole responsibility. So sometimes I've seen in smaller units where they're going, hey, the internet's not working. Well, you need to, make sure they understand they need to get their own if the building's not completely wired up for the whole building. So that is also another question you would ask the lessor. Okay, did you have a question?
I was just wondering, sometimes the Wi-Fi, I've seen where the building can only have Wi-Fi for one tenant. So what
Okay.
would happen in that case?
So the question is, sometimes the building can only have one Wi-Fi for one area in the building or one lessee. What would happen then? These are things that if you're going to need internet or Wi-Fi, you could embed into your LOI so that the question is being asked and say, lessor certifies that the unit is available for installation of internet and or Wi-Fi. If it's not, they're going to respond to you and let you know. Go ahead.
So to respond to that, if that's the case, there's only one tenant added, the owner, he's gonna say, I'm not paying for that.
Right.
He's doing it himself. So
Yes.
If you want it, you have to do it yourself.
Yeah, yeah.
Because it's hard to find a building that only 1 unit or 2 units are having a whole internet by themselves.
Right. Gustavo's saying that if that happens, then the tenant or the lessee would have to find a way to deal with it and pay for it themselves, which is generally the case. Yeah, that's true. But I always write in that so that the tenant understands that if they want those services, and mind you, first this goes to the lessor for review. It's also going to go to the lessee for the review. So they will see this comment and they can go ahead and do a little research and make sure that, you know, the provider they wanted to use can come into that particular unit. So here is where we're talking about common area maintenance. So the tenant agrees to pay its proportionate share of the estimated property operating expenses, or on smaller units, sometimes that doesn't apply. Okay, it would be checked that this does not apply. Sometimes on the smaller units, smaller offices or, you know, well, retail it usually does, but smaller office units, the camp fee may not apply. So you need to talk to the lessor about this. Okay. So the premises is used for the sole use as, that does need to be filled in. That's really important because no other use is permitted without the lessor's prior written consent. Okay, and the rules and regulations, the tenant does agree to comply with all the rules and regulations. And if applicable, owners associations, and this is nice, that are at any time posted on the premise or delivered to the tenant. Okay, so rules and regulations that are posted and or delivered to each door, the tenant needs to follow. Maintenance. So here they've left it for tenant. So probably, you know, this is up again to the lessor, but you probably want to leave them as it is, the tenant, or if check the landlord professionally maintains the premises, including heating, AC, electrical, plumbing, water systems. Okay. And number B is the landlord shall maintain the roof, foundation, exterior walls, and common areas. Now, one caveat to number A, which I would usually probably leave this to the tenant. We've had tenants say, okay, that's fine, but what if the AC, how old is the AC? What if that goes down? You know, do I have to pay for that? So you may want to put a clause that should the HVAC unit, you know, cease operation through no fault of the lessee, then the lessor shall replace it. So these are negotiation things. Again, these are negotiation things into your LOI. Okay, so that would also be addressed in your LOI, and we routinely address that particular situation.
So in that case, do you check any of those boxes?
Here, no, I just leave it
alone.
generally, but they're going to, some people, you know, they're going to be clued in on that AC because they don't know the maintenance, prior maintenance. They don't know the age. So they want to put it to the lessor if it goes down.
By the time you are filling out,
You probably know already.
you already have the LOI and they already agreed to whatever. So by the time you do that, you should know which one of those.
That he's saying you should already know that. That's correct. But the issue becomes if you didn't address it in the LOI. So make sure when you're going to get a great class next week, because I would consider Shumay top notch on commercial, top notch.
So I will address that.
Yeah.
You-
So make sure that you're addressing anything that's important or that you can think of that may help the negotiations for your client. Tenant shall not make any alterations on the premises without the landlord's prior written consent. Government imposed alterations, any alterations required by law as a result of the tenant's use is the tenant's responsibility. Landlord is responsible for other alterations required by law. Entry, the tenant will make the premise available to the landlord or the landlord's agent for inspections and things of that sort. The tenant agrees that 24-hour notice, oral or written, is reasonable.
Hey, Michelle, it's me, Paul. Quickly, I don't know if it's off topic, but
Okay,
I was thinking, is there anything on this agreement or the letter of intent where we could discuss the possibility of purchasing the property? during this?
good question. At the end of this agreement, there is a box that says OA on it, and it is an option to purchase or option to buy. So you could check that, and then it would bring in the car form OA that you would fill out.
Okay,
So that is addressed at the end of the contracts. Very good questions.
awesome. Thank you.
You're welcome. Okay, so tenant authorizes the landlord to place a for sale sign on the premises or a for lease within 90-day period preceding the termination. You know, there might be multiple units there, so you may want to address, you know, something here. If there's multiple units and there's signs going up and down or whatever, you may want to add some language in where you get the lines in the back that the lessor will be that there's for sale for lease signs usually on the property for the units which are available. So you may not want to lock into 90 days here. Maybe the, you know, the sign will represent the whole building, and you just want to explain it a little. I don't think it's a big deal. Okay. So subletting, you cannot sublet the unit as a tenant unless that the landlord has given you prior written consent. If the landlord cannot deliver the possession of the premises on the commencement date, the date will be extended on the date which the possession is made available to tenant. The expiration date will remain the same as specified in this contract. If the now this is where I want you to really listen. If the landlord is unable to deliver possession within 60 calendar days after agreed commencement date, then the tenant may terminate this agreement. Maybe your client does not want to wait 60 days. Maybe they want that a shorter term. So pay attention right here to possession. I have never seen this happen. Oh, I have. One time I've seen it happen. But, you know, just make sure that if your tenant does not want to wait 60 days, you check this box and put the days they're willing to wait. Okay. Tenant's obligation upon vacating, they need to deliver the unit in the same condition as it was given to them. And they need to give written notice to the landlord of their forwarding address. So presumably it's going to be the same that they gave on their application. So you can type that in here. And you could put forwarding address because this is and. So if you already know their forwarding address isn't going to change, a lot of times I'll just type in forwarding address in the address, or just remind them to give a written notice to the lessor when they're vacating of their forwarding address, because that will be important for their security deposit. Breach of contract. Yeah, if you early terminate on these, it's saying that you're going to be responsible for lost rent, rental commissions, advertising expenses, painting costs, etc. for the re-rental. So they're outlining some terms that if you decide to early terminate or breach the contract, that you may be responsible for these costs. Okay. So damage to the premises. If by no fault of the tenant, the premises is totally or partially damaged by fire. If the landlord elects to repair or rebuild and is able to complete such restoration within 90 days from the date of the damage, this agreement shall remain in full force and effect. Okay. Hazardous material. This is kind of really, I know when we are leasing, we have a landlord that always asks this question because he wants to know if in the if they generate any hazardous materials with their business, and if they do, they need to provide him notice of how they get that picked up and out of the premises. So pay attention to that. Normally, I haven't seen too much problem on this, but we do have one large landlord that always asks, do they have hazardous material? If they do, what's their plan for getting rid of it? Okay, so no big deal, but some landlords, some big landlords will ask that. If it was, if the units were, had condemnation, then either party may terminate the agreement. Okay, insurance, this is really important. And I have an insurance cert at the end of this I'm going to show you. So bigger landlords and even smaller ones should probably be asking. They can talk to their own insurance advisor, but ask the tenant to provide a certificate of liability insurance. And usually here, right here, tenant shall carry liability and insurance of not less than,
Yep.
we usually put $1 million here. For restaurants though, it may be 2 million because there's more liability. Here, the landlord shall maintain in an amount of at least, we usually don't fill that in, but if the landlord's willing to give you the amount, you can fill it in. But we definitely want to ask for a certificate of liability insurance from the tenant that should be delivered when they are, before they get the keys.
Commencement date, I mean, whatever.
Yeah, just prior to them getting the keys, if it's early possession,
Right.
don't give them early possession.
Without that.
Without that, discuss it with the landlord. They'll probably agree with that. Okay. So I'm going to show you what a certificate looks like at the end. Tenant estoppels. They need to execute and return the tenancy statement if it's requested by the landlord within 3 days or the landlord's agent. Just on a side note of estoppel certificates, when you are selling a commercial property, a lot of times you're going to have a tenant estoppel certificate from each tenant. You can help draft them, but sometimes the leases don't have the notices of the upper and the rent. Maybe they're way beyond this lease agreement. So you want to draft them, but you also want an email chain where you have sent all the drafts to the lessor and asked them to review and let you know if there's any amendments or changes needed. So have the lessor review any of your work and give you an okay back on that, okay? Okay. Okay, so this is just saying that if the building, if this building transfers, then the lease stays in effect. Tenant representation. Now, this is important for their credit that the tenant is warranting that all the statements that they provided were true, okay? So at any time upon discovering that the tenant's information is false, the landlord could take action. Construction-related accessibility standards. Landlord states that the premise has or has not been inspected by a certified access specialist. Usually, we're checking has not. So that's up to the landlord to let you know. And furthermore, at the end of this document, there is also a disclosure that auto-populated with this lease. Okay, so mediation provision applies whether or not you've initialed arbitration. Okay, so if you're initialing down here for arbitration, this is like the same arbitration as we have on residential. So make sure you read this and understand it. But just bear in mind that the mediation applies whether or not the arbitration provision was initialed. Okay. If more than, okay, so this is important too, joint and individuals obligations. If there's more than one tenant, each tenant is responsible. If one of the tenants left and left the other one holding the bag, they're still responsible for the full amount, okay? And the guarantor. So notices may be served by mail, fax, or courier at the following address or location. Very important that you fill this in, because if you need to notice a lessor or a lessee, you need this filled in. So make sure that you're filling this in properly. And ask both of them to give you the proper notification address or how they are going to receive it. Okay. So indemnification, tenant shall indemnify, defend and hold landlord harmless from any claims, disputes, litigations, or judgments and attorney fees arising out of the tenant's use of the premise. So I think that would more pertain if they did something that the landlord, didn't know and it was not proper. So that's an important clause for us. Now, here's the other terms and conditions. This is where you would write things like, if you didn't do an addendum, with all of the rental increases, you could write a statement that the base rent shall increase by whatever annually, whatever percentage that the lessor wants. And then the tenant, this is about the free rent that we already went over. So if that applies, make sure that you're noting it so everybody understands it. Paul, here's the check for your option agreement, which is the option to buy. So if you check that, it's going to populate. Attorney fees. If any action proceeding arising out of this agreement, the prevailing party between the landlord and the tenant shall be entitled to reasonable attorney fees and costs from the non-prevailing party. Okay, so the entire contract, this is it. Real estate is all in writing. There's no verbal. So anything that you are agreeing to in this document, make sure it is annotated. Make sure you are really reviewing it when you get it for review. Your client will be reviewing it, but also help them and you review it too. Okay, and take your letter of intent, check it off, make sure that everything that you thought you were agreeing to is in the document. Okay. So the brokerage, the landlord and tenant each pay the fee agreed to, if any, by separate written agreement. That's usually on the listing agreement. Agency confirmation, you're going to want to make sure that you fill this out in its entirety. Okay, so if the landlord and tenant need specific information, this is advising them to seek legal, tax, insurance, and other desired assistance from professionals. Okay, so here's where the guarantor, you check the box that they are guaranteeing the lease. You will do the full application package on the guarantor as well. Very important. Going to do one on the person leasing it. If it's not the guarantor, a lot of times it's the same. It may be a entity name, and the guarantor is the managing member of that entity. So make sure this is filled out. I know that we can do signatures over the line, but I like wet signatures. If you can't do that, then you can use DocuSign. But for me, I don't know. I guess I'm super old school. I like wet signatures, especially when it comes to guarantor, but that's again up to the lessor and lessee. And then this is where the landlord signs here. Now, I want to point one thing out. Let the lessee sign first, the tenant, and don't have the landlord sign until you have in your hot hands that security deposit check with the first month's rent and any other fees that are required. Make sure it's a cashier's check. For the first in, take a cashier's check. So you don't return any agreement until the lessor signs it. Then once you have a copy of, that check, you make a copy of it for your file, you get it to the landlord, then the landlord will sign. Make sure that you have that first. Okay. So this is what I was talking about. This form auto populates. It's the same question. The landlord states the premise have or have not been inspected by a certified access specialist. Usually in my dealings, it's been have not. Talk to the landlord. This is very important on D, notwithstanding anything to the contrary elsewhere in the lease, or modifications necessary to correct violations or construction related accessibility standards to the premise are the responsibility of the tenant, or if check the landlord. So talk to your client on that. That could be an ADA bathroom, something like that. So be talking. One of the things that I'm always looking for is an ADA bathroom. And because I don't know if it is, I always make sure to ask. Okay.
Hey, Michelle, quick question.
Yes.
Let's say you execute this agreement, right? And during the agreement, the tenant falls on hard times, right? So is there an addendum where the landlord will forgive some of these things or release them from some of these agreements? Is that like a separate document that will need to be completed?
Well, if Peter's here, he can jump in, but I have never seen that. I did see during COVID where there was some language that, if the,
That was a special.
yeah, it's very special times, but I haven't seen that, Paul, because right now, so as an agent, you do your best, but once this is executed, it is between the landlord and the tenant. But to answer your question very directly, no, I have not seen a landlord let that kind of language into a lease or add it.
Okay, or there's not another document or an addendum to that, like, let's say they do decide to forgive and to waive some of these, agreed upon,
You mean like commission fee or something like that?
no, not commissions, just like someone, let's say the agreement is to, to lease for 5 years, but into the agreement, 3 years, the tenant is having a hard time making payments.
Yeah,
Want to break from the
Well-
lease.
I have not seen it. I'm telling you,
Nothing.
in all the years I've been doing commercial leases, I haven't been doing them long, maybe about 8 years. I have not seen any language like that where they would write something at the top to forgive. If anybody has, they can jump in and let me know, but I personally, Paul, have not seen that.
Got it, okay.
Yeah,
I can add something to that. You enter in this agreement with the intentions of being able to pay. I mean, you vet the tenant
mhm.
with the ability to pay. So if in the event that, they're not able to pay in like, let's say, year 3, they're gonna be obligated to pay the remainder of that term, the 2 years that are remaining on the lease. If the landlord wants to forgive it, that's up to him at that point, based on the relationship he has with the tenant. But the tenant is obligated to fulfill the full term of the lease, just so you know.
Got it.
Yeah, and if you let the landlord know ahead of time and they can jump on and get it leased, so those are things you would want to be
Now,
heavily communicating.
Now, there's other ways you can go about it. If you have someone else that will fill the shoes of that, then you can, ask the landlord to vet that tenant, and then the tenant
Yes,
assumes the remainder of that lease. So there are ways to work around that, but you do have to start communicating with that landlord and not just surprise them saying, hey, I can't pay anymore and stuff.
right. Yeah. And that's the way I've seen these kind of situations resolved, Paul, just what Ruben said. So property management advisory, the address of the building. This is our own property management advisory from Coldwell Banker George Realty, just letting the landlord and the tenant know that we do not provide them with property management. So they need to handle those things on their own, and everybody signs it so they're all aware. And I really think this is nice, because when you get those calls that the toilet's broken, hey, could you call the landlord? Because that happens. They don't think about, oh, they know your phone number. So, this is advising them that we don't do property management. And our E&O does not cover for us to be property manager, okay? So I just want to be real clear on that. This is a very important document, and important for you to understand that. So I pulled out a sample, I whited out the issuers on this certificate of liability insurance. This is what it's going to look like. You can, if your client calls, they can generally get this in a day. Doesn't take too long, a day or 2 at the most. So here's the million each occurrence here. So this is what it looks like. And let me show you down here. So certificate holders is named as additional insured. So you want to make sure that's in this box. And then the certificate holder is going to be the lessor. Name and address goes here. So they become an additional insured on this certificate. And I'm not an insurance guru, but I've seen this work a lot. So you can call, your client can call their trusted advisor for insurance. Yes.
On that certificate you have here for $1 million, what was it? Was it a regular?
This one was a small warehouse,
Small.
a small warehouse. Yeah. Okay.
They have a hazard maybe in there.
Yeah. Yeah. So I was asked questions on, okay, so how do you get your money from the landlord? You invoice them. So this is just a sample of an invoice. I just made a XYZ corporation. I just made a sample. Of course, if there's any free rent, And you don't pay them, you don't pay yourself commission on that. Now, the whole commission check, unless there's another agreement with the Coldwell Banker form, which I'm going to show you next, will come into Coldwell Banker. Now, if there's another agent involved, a W-9 is required. You need to ask them for it. They'll know what that is. Their broker will provide it because we cannot pay commission unless we have that W-9. So when this check comes into our brokerage, we're going to take it to the bank, make sure it's cleared, make sure we have a W-9, and then we will cut the check.
In the case that you're using right here for the commission, that means that property was not listed for lease. That's why you submit this invoice. Otherwise, if it's listed and it's paying commission, it should be already automatic, right?
Right, but so on the, okay, so that's a good point. So maybe on the MLS, it says 2.5, but we have risers in it. So we want to maximize and get, the money on the uppers. So if this was raising by 3%, we're going to bill. And then we're going to make sure that the landlord knows that the free rent is zeroed out. Okay. So you always have to provide some kind of invoice, but on our forms, let's see, I think this is on our website, instructions for lease check. This form it can be used too. Our particular landlords prefer an invoice. This is where the commission to submit separate cashier's check. They're asking the tenant to do this. The landlords we work with don't want to do this. So again, this is another option. I'm just bringing it to the forefront. Okay, so I hope this has enlightened you a bit. And if you have any questions, we're here.
Michelle, quick
Oh.
question.
Okay, go ahead.
Yes,
Maggie.
from your experience, how is commission calculated on lease agreements?
It depends on the length. It's all negotiable, right? So sometimes on, let's say if you have a 10-year lease on a big unit, the landlord may have a sliding scale or a variable rate, as they call it on the MLS. Maybe they'll pay 3% for the first 5 years, but that second 5 years, they're going to pay only 2%, 1%, whatever. So it's all negotiable. And also, you need to make sure that the other agent understands. I always say, which they should know, but I don't know, I'm probably overbearing sometimes, but I'll say you understand, and I will write it in the LOI that you will not be paid commission on free rental abatement months. And some landlords will not pay commission on options. So you need to address this in your LOI. And next week, when we present that, you're going to see how we address that. Yeah.
Right.
So Paul, just to reiterate what Michelle just said, when you get to this part of the transaction, the commissions have already been negotiated in the LOI, which we're gonna get to next week. So just rest assured, when you get to this point, everybody already knows who's getting paid and what they're getting paid.
Right.
Yeah. And Maggie has a question.
The tenant, sometimes they use a corporate name or LLC.
Yes.
How you gonna put the name of the
Okay,
tenant?
so Maggie's asking when it's a corporation or an LLC. So some LLCs do business as their LLC name, and some are a DBA too. Like we have one that is an LLC DBA Recovery Lab, which we're working on. So what I do is I will put, if they tell me there's a DBA, I'm gonna put XYZ LLC DBA Recovery Lab. Now, one thing, the Secretary of State website, go to Google and put California Secretary of State Business Search, insert the name of that LLC. You can pull up the documents. What are we looking for? We're making sure that it's an active entity, and you can find on those documents who the signator can be, who can sign for that entity. Also, please, if it's an entity, make sure you're providing the representation capacity form. Do a favor for your landlord, go on to the Secretary of State. They would probably do it anyway, but just to show due diligence, I do that. What if it's from Delaware? So we don't have access. Ask the other agent, do you have the entity document?
So the tenant, the name, you just put the C, LCC, the name, not the signature of the tenant.
No,
Oh.
it's gonna be the entity,
Not the. person.
XYZ LLC DBA Recovery Lab. And you're gonna have a representation capacity, whoever that lady or gentleman is signing. It's going to reflect it on the representation capacity, who they are to the entity, what their title is, and they're going to certify that they have the authority to sign. But you want to do a check for your client through the Secretary of State. I always do that. And I lay those right into my file.
So the tenant's name, you just put the LLC's name, not the.
No, you're gonna
Right.
put the person, it's gonna, let me show you at the back. Good question. Now I see where you're going. Okay. So back here, let's say even if I have an LLC, it's gonna be, the tenant will be, XYZ LLC, DBA Recovery Lab. And then I'm gonna put by, BY, print the name.
Michelle Olson.
And then I'm gonna have Recovery Lab and I'm gonna have them sign it and date it. But I'm gonna put by, print the name of the individual and their title. Yeah.
Michelle Olson, president.
And I'm also gonna have the representation capacity attached. Is there any other questions? Let me look in the box.
Yeah,
Okay, go ahead.
back to when he asked about, there is a box right there for purchasing the property. That only will apply if it's a small individual, single unit. And that like that, outside individual.
Yeah,
If it's a building.
yes.
With multiple tenants, you're not gonna use.
Like if it was an individual medical condo,
There you go.
yeah, you could do
And
that.
If you can only buy it.
Right.
Otherwise you feel like, I'm gonna buy the whole. shop
Yeah,
center.
that's correct. Paul, Gustavo's making a good point. It depends on if you're gonna attach that option to buy, which I don't think we recommend. It's kind of difficult. We don't recommend it. But, you know, you got to make sure that that particular unit can be sold on its own and has its own APN, okay?
And now. Michelle, this is very broad.
Yes,
This form right here, can we get the APR, somebody to shows that the APR form, which is hardly you're gonna use this on a very multiple.
yes, you're absolutely right.
So you're gonna be using APR, so if you don't wanna look at it.
You mean AIR? Yeah, yeah.
Yeah.
Well,
If you show this to a broker. a
I
bidder,
know.
He's gonna laugh on you. and
So,
take his-
Gustavo's saying that most of your bigger brokerages and will use an AIR lease agreement. Now, if you're going around with the tenant, luckily for you, they will type that AIR. So you want to have time, at least a few days to review it and make sure that you understand the terms. That even the AIR lease agreement is going to kick off with an LOI.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yes, Gustavo has a good point. Your bigger commercial firms are always going to be using AIR. So this is just kind of entry level to commercial. So yes, I agree with you. I type AIR all the time. Yeah.
I mean.
What is AIR abbreviation? What is it for?
It's I don't know. It's a
Okay.
commercial contracts and leases. Gosh, let me just Google it.
Association of-
I
It's
could look.
AIR. But you can buy AIR forms through the MLS. I don't know if a lot of you know that. And it last year it was just below 200. I think the form suite went up to 229 annually, and Ruben can address that, but you do have the capability of purchasing an AIR suite through MLS, which is a lot cheaper than going through AIR as a member, okay? So,
If you are gonna be engaging in commercial real estate and really taking it serious, then you should learn the AIR forms and also subscribe to it. But if you are just going to start dabbling and don't know yet, don't invest the money just yet and just learn about commercial. And then if you feel that that's the route you want to go, then make the dive and invest the money into that. And also CoStar, because you're not going to be able to search for properties or do anything unless you have CoStar. CoStar is like the MLS to residential. So for now, we're just trying to give you the entry level of commercial.
Yeah, and Gustavo?
The reason I say the AR form is because you might send this, and let's say that the guy is desperate and say, I don't have nobody else, he will send you that form to you. And if you have never seen that form, how are you gonna explain it to your client? So we need to have some kind of like knowledge about that form at least,
Yeah,
so then you'll know what to say or what. to
Yeah.
explain it.
yeah. So he's saying that we should have some knowledge about the AAR. Now, remember, as a lease listing agent, your lessor is going to tell you what form they want. So
Yeah.
if you're really gonna get into it, as Ruben said, some of your bigger lessors, okay, some of them even have their own leases, right? So if you're working like we do for a lessor that is, he does it all. So when we first met him 8 years ago, I said, may I have a copy so I know what it looks like? So I read it, but you're gonna be asking the lessor, what form do you want to use? If it's a small building, we have one in San Dimas that prefers this car form, tiny little 500 square foot offices. So they prefer this, but your bigger lessors are probably gonna look to AIR. Yeah, Gustavo has a good point. Any other questions? Ruben?
No, I think we're good. I just wanted to show them after you're done, if you could.
Yeah, I'm complete. Thank you so much, everybody. It's been such a fun morning, and I appreciate all your questions and your enthusiasm. Thank you.
Hang tight, everybody. I'm gonna show you where you guys, we constantly get asked
Yeah.
if we could get a copy of this recording. And also if it could get emailed to you. I'm gonna show you where to access all our trainings for those who don't know. Okay, Michelle, if you can allow me to share my screen.
New share?
No, you're gonna have to grant me access as a host. Just click on the 3 buttons by my
Yeah, I
name.
got it. Oh. Okay, I'm sorry, I'm really ignorant. I don't know how to give it to you. Does anybody know?
Hey, guys.
You put.
He's
I have Edgar going over there right now.
coming, he's coming.
Hang tight, everybody. Technical difficulties.
Yeah, it's called Michelle.
Don't worry, it's okay.
Turning red.
It's
It's true.
it's all good. It's all casual,
Oh.
not brain surgery.
Yes, Ruben.
I need a host to share.
Oh, okay.
Where'd you click out?
Okay.
Here?
It's all done.
Okay. Where'd you click out?
Participants?
Oh, okay.
Can you guys see my screen?
Okay, I'm gonna sit
Yeah.
back here and watch.
All right, so I always keep it in my favorites, but you're gonna click on agent login, the Coldwell Banker agent login, okay? And I'll put this in the chat box too, for those who don't have. That's the URL to go straight to our agent login, okay? When you log into this, if you want to check out the recording for 2 weeks ago, 6 months ago, whatever, you go to this agent login, you're gonna have these 4 tabs here. There's also an event calendar here too, so you'll know what's upcoming and stuff too. You go to training and coaching, and then here's all, you click on CBR YouTube videos. It'll send you to our YouTube channel.
Yeah.
And then it'll have all the recordings. We have some Monday meetings. Here's lunch and learns, Friday training.
Wait,
So this is where you-
Ruben, can I add something to that, what you're saying? So
Sure.
the Monday meetings are not on here as of the new, remember?
Right, but these we started to put them on there, but we took them out, because we don't want them to go public. So these are the only two that you'll see here. Moving forward, you're not gonna have the Monday meetings, but every other session is recorded and put onto this YouTube channel. And you can access that YouTube channel through the same way that I just showed you, okay? I want to show you something else since I'm here. Let's see, go back. I'm gonna go back to this. When you go to yes,
Sorry, this is Sylvia. Just also when you sent us after the meeting, you also sent us a little link that says recording, so we can always go there as well, right?
yeah, so there's multiple ways. We're gonna email, once the recording is completed after like today, Edgar's gonna email it to everybody so you can actually access it through your the link that we're gonna email. But let's just say 6 months down the road, you're like, oh, let me just review this. I'm gonna make a commercial lease listing. You can actually go back to the date and it's labeled the topic as well and review it. So there's multiple ways to do it. You don't have to go search for that link through your email as well. Make sense? Yes?
Forever.
Maggie has a question.
How long they stay there?
How long does it stay there?
That's a question for you, Edgar. I would
So
say
it
forever.
doesn't go away. It doesn't go away, Maggie.
Or just always there?
Always there.
Yeah, so it'll be there forever, okay? So when I want to show everybody how to get to the fillable MLS input form. So you don't have to actually print it and then write it out. And a lot of agents have been asking about that. So you go to agent resources right here, okay? And then you're going to click on CRMLS multiple listing input forms. It's going to launch you to the CRMLS, right? Then you go to the listing input forms. And then let's just say it's residential. Let me move this real quick. And then in order to be fillable, you have to download it, okay? This is very important. That's why a lot of agents like, oh, you can't fill it in, you can't fill it in. There's a little button up here on top that has a little arrow pointing down that's for download. You click on that and it's on my computer, it shows down here, but on some Apples, it's up here. You're gonna open it up and then now you're able to fill it in. You see? Once you have all the data that filled in, then you just go ahead and print it or download it and save it onto your computer. And then you can email it to your seller to sign and also to Anna or Denise for them to start the MLS, putting it into the MLS. Okay? And that's all I wanted to show you.
Thank you.
All right. Okay, guys, that's it for this week. I appreciate you guys coming. You guys have a wonderful weekend and keep on prospecting, okay?
Yeah,
thank you.
Right.
All right, guys. Have a nice weekend.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
So you can do
Bye
it
bye.
from here.
Edgar, you want to start?